Please elaborate on how metta is a good basis for Vipassana. Is it only once metta jhana has been developed? Three questions that are kind of linked. How do we know when to practice metta versus mindfulness? And if I meditate for an hour, what's the best way to combine Vipassana and metta? How much to dedicate to each one? It would be very easy to speak for a whole hour about all of this, so very briefly. There are two main ways in which metta supports vipassana, or the cultivation of metta supports vipassana. The first is that it gives us a habit of resting in an attitude of acceptance, a metta attitude. It gives us a strong habit of metta. And this carries over to the vipassana habit towards ourselves, towards whatever is arising, so that there's much less resistance, much less judgment, much less clinging to results. As you know, in the cultivation of insight in Vipassana Bhavana, we need to observe phenomena that are arising, however they present themselves. Sometimes they're pleasant, sometimes they're deeply unpleasant, sometimes they're wholesome, sometimes unwholesome mind states arise to be known. A metta attitude is essential to be able to simply rest with receiving these phenomena, seeing them clearly. As Sayadaw said on his very first talk, you cannot cultivate vipassana without metta. For this reason, the metta attitude is so, so important. The second way in which metta bhavana supports vipassana bhavana is in the development of concentration. Vipassana bhavana utilizes, or at least in this Mahasi tradition, um, momentary concentration rather than fixed concentration. So it's a different kind of concentration that we develop here in the metta practice than one uses in Vipassana. So it's not a direct transfer of concentration. But if we have the ability to access the stillness of mind that we develop here in the metta practice, that will make it easier in the Vipassana practice to focus. Since doing a lot of metta practice, people often report that when the mind begins to wander in the Vipassana practice, it's much more pliable, much more easily moved back to the object of focus in the Vipassana practice because of having done the metta practice. So there's the cultivation of metta attitude, there's the deepening of the skill of concentration. And then there's a third aspect that has to do with atta and anatta. Maria just mentioned that in the Vipassana practice, we see clearly that all phenomena are anatta, not self. Metta is a back door into the understanding of this because we weaken atta with this practice. We weaken the ego self with the cultivation again and again and again to all as to myself. May I be happy. May my dear friend be happy. May my enemy be happy. May all beings be happy. We come to a place with the metta practice where the atta is no longer the center of the universe. And this kind of metta wisdom is very useful in the Vipassana practice. Sometimes also in the metta practice, people have spontaneous insights into anatta. It comes with the package. So metta supports vipassana, vipassana supports metta. And how do we know when to practice metta versus mindfulness? They're both wholesome. So you can't do it wrong. But in the context of the metta practice, for example, if we're cultivating metta for somebody who is extremely difficult, the thing to use as kind of a landmark for, okay, it's time to do some vipassana, is if you've persistently been cultivating metta or trying to cultivate metta for some time, and the mind is just struggling with this, unable to do it, getting tighter and tighter, or perhaps emotional reactivity is getting stronger, that's a good time to stop cultivating metta consciously and to consciously pick up the vipassana. But in the context of daily life, whether you cultivate metta, whether you cultivate mindfulness, it matters less. Do what brings lightness and gladness to the mind. Whatever the mind wants to do that particular day is a good thing to do. Both are wholesome, as I've said. And then in that context of if you meditate for an hour, how to use metta in the support of vipassana. Sayadaw U Janaka recommends 5 minutes of metta at the beginning of a vipassana sitting. And that's a good rule of thumb. Just a few minutes. Do it as long as you like, really, but at least 5 minutes, sometimes more. Um, there's no wrong way of doing that. So a little bit at the beginning is always good. In the context of a Vipassana retreat, it's possible to cultivate metta in the very first sitting of the day for the whole sitting, and then to base your entire day of practice on that. That can also be quite useful, depending on how, what states of mind are coming up, how difficult your Vipassana practice is, can be very supportive.